Hi, welcome to Bastards of History, where we discuss some of the lesser known bad guys of history while in a bar. We explore each of these dubious and ethically challenged characters in 20 minutes or less, and of course, at the end, I'll give you our ranking for each historical figure on the scale of bastardness. For today's Bastard of History, we are going back to Russia, but in the Middle Ages, for the life of Ivan the Terrible. So, let's make a drink and get started. Now, before we get into this, I do want to clarify something about today's Bastard of History's name. Ivan the Terrible is derived from the Russian Grozny, which is really meant to evoke power. Some variations suggest it was meant to be along the lines of Ivan the Terrible Wrath of God, or something like that. So while he is known as Ivan the Terrible, in his context it had a different meaning. His birth name was Ivan Vasilievich, and he was born in 1530 in Kolomenskoye, which is very near to Moscow. His father was Vasily III, the reigning Grand Prince of Moscow. So, what are the odds that this son of a king is going to turn out to be a total piece of shit? Let's find out. His father died when Ivan was just 3 years old, and that may be the only part in this story where we have some sympathy for this guy. His mother acted as regent for a while, and then when she passed, several feuding boyar families fought for control. This made our man Ivan resentful of these families, which becomes a factor later on. So, at the age of 16, in the year 1547, Ivan the Terrible was crowned the Czar of All Russia. Ivan was the very first Russian monarch to be crowned Czar of All Russia, and he did this to project a message that he, and only he, was the supreme ruler of all Russia. Ivan the Terrible deliberately sought to elevate himself. He was now a divine leader enacting God's will, and this highly self-serving blend of theology with monarchy would then be passed on to future czars. So, Ivan the Terrible definitely set the stage for centuries of brutal oppression under the czars who followed him. 2 weeks after being crowned Tsar, he married Anastasia Romanovna of the Romanov family, and she became the first Russian Tsaritsa. He would go on to have at least 6 different wives, even though the Orthodox Church only recognized 3 of them, which is pretty interesting. It's almost as if the church was like, okay, you can have 2 extra wives, but that's it, okay? We gotta draw the line somewhere. And then he was just like, nah, fuck it, I want more. So, early life of Ivan the Terrible. Born of the Tsar. Dad dies when he is 3. Doesn't trust advisors or other families with power. Becomes Czar of all Russia at age 17. Dude is in the zone, dictatorship-wise. So, what did Ivan the Terrible do to make him live up to his lovely moniker and end up on our list of bastards of history? Quite a lot, in fact. Let's sip some liquid courage and check it out. Perhaps because he was the son of a king who got crowned as an even bigger king at the height of his hormonal adolescence, our man Ivan had a terrible temperament. He was prone to insane outbursts and bouts of madness and paranoia. His religious views were also troubling at best, as Ivan the Terrible believed in his own specific form of Orthodox Christianity, namely his divine right as ruler of Russia to do God's will, which led him to inflict hellaciously cruel punishments and executions, as though he sought to bring hell on earth to those opposed to him. On a micro level, our terribly temperamental Ivan turned on a holy man whom he had appointed as the Metropolitan of Moscow. This was a prestigious position in the Russian Orthodox Church. Ivan had this honorable holy man, who was named Philip, imprisoned in a shitty cell, in chains, with a heavy collar around his neck. The poor fuck wasn't fed for a few days, and then eventually he was immured. Well, that means put behind a wall, basically, inside of a monastery. Philip was eventually strangled by one of Ivan the Terrible's minions. Then there was the case of Prince Alexander Gorbatyshevsky, whom Ivan grew jealous of for his popularity. He accused Prince Alexander of plotting to kill him, which was not true, and then beheaded the guy and his 17-year-old son. The dude got jealous and wiped out a guy's entire bloodline. And speaking of bloodlines, at one point later in life, Ivan the Terrible got into a fight with his own son and struck him in the head. The blow proved to be fatal, and the event is well portrayed by the painting completed by Ilya Repin. But Ivan the Terrible's cruelty was not just confined to his personal dealings. No, this paranoid and bipolar piece of shit put his savagery on scale. So, what did he do? A lot of shit. But let's start with one of his most egregious displays of horrific slaughter, the sack of Novgorod. You're probably thinking, oh, he invaded another country and sacked one of their cities, and it was called Novgorod. Pretty much. But it was even worse than that because it was his own fucking city and his own fucking people that he massacred. That's right. Novgorod was a Russian city within his own borders. In 1570, Russia was going through some tough times. There was a plague, a famine, and a war going on. You know, the usual shit for those times. Ivan the Terrible, for some completely inexplicable reason, became utterly convinced that the wealthy city of Novgorod was actively planning to defect and join with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. No evidence exists to suggest that this was actually in the works, but in Ivan the Terrible's mind, he knew it to be true. So, he did what any reasonable person would do when they have a hunch. He deployed his special forces to raid the city. And that's a fairly mild way of describing it. I actually read a Polish historian's in-depth description of what happened, and it was a real horror show. Ivan the Terrible personally directed his men to wall off the city so that nobody could escape. Yes, he was actually there, giving orders and witnessing what happened. They then proceeded to, over the course of over a month, kill men, women, and children at a rate of hundreds per day. I will omit some of the more graphic descriptions of what transpired, but many of them were tied to sleighs and shot into the freezing Volkhov River, where these innocent civilians died of drowning or hypothermia. A number of clergy were beaten to death. The Archbishop of Novgorod was publicly humiliated through the streets, and thousands of others were brutally tortured by being roasted alive. It was a chaotic and savage scene orchestrated firsthand by one of the darkest minds humanity has ever witnessed. And what did he do after Ivan the Terrible had slain at least several thousand of his own people and laid waste to the city? He packed up his shit and left. Yeah, he left the surviving population to fend for themselves, who almost all died of starvation as he torched like 90% of their farmlands, all because he had a paranoid hunch that they might defect. But wait, there's more. Ivan the Terrible was a big-time anti-Semite. I mean, he was goose-stepping before goose-stepping even was a thing, if you know what I mean. In 1563, Ivan the Terrible ordered all of the Jews residing in the city of Polotsk who would not be baptized to be drowned in the nearby river. It was about 300 people, just because they were Jewish, and he hated bagels. In 1558, because he wanted access to the Baltic Sea, Ivan the Terrible launched what became the Livonian War, which lasted 24 years and drew a whole host of regional powers against Russia. This crippled the Russian economy and threatened the country's stability, ultimately leading to a peace treaty that did not result in Russia gaining access to the Baltic Sea. It laid the groundwork for what became Russia's time of troubles shortly thereafter. We do not know the body count, but the casualties were staggering for all involved. So, dude wants access to the Baltic Sea, starts a massive war, gets thousands of people killed, still loses, doesn't get what he wants, and has ushered in an era of prolonged suffering for his people. Sounds like a winner to me. But he didn't lose all military efforts. No, Ivan the Terrible had some successes. They include conquering Kazan and Astrakhan. In the case of Kazan, Ivan the Terrible cut off the water supply to the city, and when they took it, thousands of innocent people were killed in the bloodletting. In the Crimea, the Russian forces had success against the Tatars, often called Tartars here in the West. But the guy who ultimately defeated them was Prince Mikhail Voronitsky. Our man Ivan the Terrible was nowhere near that dramatic fight. He was chilling far away. And then 1 year later, what was Prince Mikhail Voronitsky's reward for leading such a magnificent victory for the Tsar's army? He was tortured to death. Brutally. Roasted alive by Ivan the Terrible himself. Yes, he personally raked the coals that eventually killed this poor fuck in one of the worst ways imaginable. In terms of domestic affairs, Ivan the Terrible doesn't perform much better. He introduced the first laws restricting the mobility of peasants, which eventually led to the system of serfdom. You know, that repressive program that bordered on slavery, or at the very least indentured servitude. The trail of carnage left by Ivan the Terrible put his country in a horrible state, and he is generally regarded as a very bad czar across every metric by historians. But if you don't believe me, just ask another autocrat who ruled Russia hundreds of years later. Around the time of World War II, Joseph Stalin himself reportedly remarked, quote, "Ivan the Terrible was very cruel." You know you're a real asshole when Joseph Stalin describes you as very cruel. Ivan the Terrible's reign brought economic hardship, foreign policy failure, the consolidation of the Tsar's power, and the onset of serfdom. He paved the way for the autocratic nature of the Russian Tsardom and the long-term oppression of the peasant class. And all along the way, he brutalized his people, espoused anti-Semitic tendencies, acted on those anti-Semitic tendencies in vicious ways, and destroyed one of his own cities on a paranoid whim. He personally led some of these atrocities, witnessed the horror, and insisted it continue. Even legit holy men were not spared, nor was his own son. He even personally tortured a man who had fought bravely on his behalf and secured a great victory for him, to death in an agonizing manner. Let's not waste any more time. Ivan the Terrible's ranking on the scale of bastardness is without a doubt psychopathic mass murderer. He is one of the absolute very worst bastards of history. If, for some fucking reason, you don't agree with my rating, please comment below and tell me why I'm wrong. And while you're down there, hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep making these. Want us to cover a specific bastard of history? Let us know in the comments section. Until next time, keep calm, drink on, and for the love of God, do not be a bastard like Ivan the Terrible.